admitting some people as we go, but thank you for joining us this afternoon. Welcome to our third webinar in the Era of Accelerated Change series, hosted by SBS Ed, Stellenbosch Business School Executive Development. It is Change Fit Leadership Rolling with the Punches. So the topic of this year's webinar series focuses on how we can manage change in 4 key business areas. So our first webinar focused on AI. The second was on risk management. We have this one on leadership. And our last one coming up in October is around strategic change. So, I don't really want to tell you that change is inevitable. Growth is optional. We all know that. And I find that to be quite an overwhelming thought. So how we manage the change comes down to the leadership, doesn't it? So let's each of us use the next 59 minutes as thinking time to slow down amidst the accelerating change. I'm Kerry Smalley, Marketing Director here at SBS Ed, and I am very, very pleased to introduce you to Anna-Marie Leroux as facilitator for today's session. Anna-Marie is an international strategy and innovation consultant. She is a very valuable member of our faculty, and she is an all-round awesome human. So joining Anna-Marie are 2 industry leaders, also from our clients, and I'm sure equally awesome humans. Kavi Ugara, dialing in from Port Louis in Mauritius. Thank you, Kavi. It's now 2 hours ahead, so just after 5 o'clock. Kavi has a wealth of people leadership experience. He is the Chief Human Resources Officer at Mauritius Telecom, founder of a CEO think tank, and a published author. Welcome, Kavi.
Thank you.
A warm welcome to Angelo Swartz, joining us from Quebec in the Eastern Cape, formerly known
Durban,
as PE.
actually.
Are you in Durban? Sorry, Angelo, in
Yeah.
Durban.
PE is my home. I won't try to pronounce Quebec either.
I know, I actually practice. Angelo is Chief Executive of SPAR South Africa and brings a deep knowledge of the Southern African market. And you also chair the SPAR Guild of the Southern African NPC.
That's right.
A big, big thank you to the 3 of you, Anna-Marie, Kavi, and Angelo, for availing yourselves this afternoon to really help us unpack how best to roll with these punches. To our wonderful audience, I would like to remind you that this is very definitely an interactive session. So, while I ask that you mute yourselves while our speakers are speaking, please do keep your cameras on as far as possible, and please do get involved. Please share your comments, questions, and perspectives in the chat, and we'll also have a Q&A session during the second half of the session. So we only have an hour. Anna-Marie, over to you.
Thank you, Kerry. Thank you for that warm welcome in a chilly Cape Town. So to everybody in the room, we as a team from Stellenbosch Business School really hope that the next hour will be meaningful and that you will walk away refocused and hopefully a little bit more re-energized. So before we kick off, before I give some context and then hand over to my very esteemed colleagues, I have a question to ask. I have a quick poll for the audience. So everybody who's in the room at the moment, I want you to take this poll as your personal perspective, where you are sitting in your business, in your organizations. Please give us a sense of if you believe that we are currently experiencing a leadership crisis. So looking at your communities, looking at your political leaders, looking at your sports leaders, are we currently experiencing a leadership crisis? We would love to hear your opinion. We will keep the poll open for about 2 minutes, and then Kerry and her team, Jane and Chanel and everybody will interrupt me, and we will share the findings because I think it might guide some of our perspectives today. But please lean in. You are so welcome in this room. So maybe just to kick off and to make sure that I bring everybody gently into the conversation today, leadership and organizational change are systemically intertwined. So the moment our organizations need to adapt to an environment, leadership shows up. The relevance of our discussion today, specifically focusing on change-fit leadership, not leadership in general, leadership when we have those high-stakes moments, when leaders are exposed and they can ride the wave of unity and support, or sometimes face abject rejection, which we so often see in business specifically. I think, and this is my personal opinion, that maybe our traditional approaches may be falling a little bit short, specifically in this phase of unprecedented change. You know, the complexity of change that our leaders have to deal with since the pandemic is overwhelming. So firstly, I think the seismic shift post-pandemic from a technological point of view, I think we are all sitting in this room and we are reluctantly enamored with AI, possibly endangered by it. And I know we've had a webinar on that already, but our leaders are faced, you know, they are forced to make choices and trade-offs on very trying political and economic situations. And then again, this social demands that we are faced with as leaders. Thinking about close to home, maybe our employees. We are dealing with hybrid work environments, possibly the biggest work reshuffle in human history. We see our colleagues, our friends, our peers suffering from burnout. We see people quietly quitting, or maybe just having a crisis of purpose, you know, finding meaning at work. And all of these changes might be subtle. Some of them might be quite catastrophic. But the fact is that our consumers and our end users, new and existing, are in the face of all this change. They are thriving. They are not thriving. They're possibly merely surviving. And that poses the question to us as leaders, all of us sitting in this room. What mindset, what skills, what capacity, what competencies might be relevant to take us through our current context? So here to share their focus and most importantly, hopefully their failures, are two leaders who I'm happy to call friends personally. Corvi and Angelo, thank you so much for your willingness to pause for a moment with our audience and to look at this very necessary conversation today. Kerry, I hope you have some results for us.
I do. I'm going to share that.
Oh my goodness. 87%. Is that what I'm reading? 87% of our audience are saying that we are in the midst of a leadership crisis. I think, Carvey, Angelo, this possibly, you know, makes the necessity of this conversation even more pertinent. So maybe just to kick off and just to let everybody join us in their thoughts, I want to know from you, maybe Angelo, if you can kick us off, you know, what does change leadership mean for you? Do you maybe have a personal perspective or definition, for lack of a better word, on the concept of change leadership?
No, that's an interesting question. I think my personal perspective is that leadership is always about change, right? So, and it's interesting because I've been reading, oddly enough, about Caligula of all people recently, and one of his favorite sayings when dealing with a victim as unfortunately as he did back then was asking them if they understood the meaning and the root of the word crisis, and I guess in Greek it would be krisis. So and I was genuinely reading it last night, and the root of the word actually means decision-making point.
Wow.
Which is quite interesting. And I think from a change point of view, leading through change is just leading, right? So if there's no need to change anything and there's no need to go anywhere, then there's no point to the leadership if you're just going to stay where you are. And I think for me, I had a well, you'll know Conrad, but one of my first sort of mentors used to have this saying: is which was if you are leading and there's no one following, you're actually just going for a walk. Which has actually stayed with me, and I think there's quite a bit of work on leadership, and for me, I think what we often misunderstand about leadership, and particularly leading in a time where change is necessary, is that leadership is not an act in and of itself. It's actually a system, because leadership can never be entered into by one person exclusively. It implies the willing followership of a group of people or a single person. And for me, I think that's kind of where I always root my thinking around leadership, around that thought, that there's nothing I can do that in and of itself is an act of leadership. It becomes an act of leadership when people choose to follow.
You said some very, very big, you shared some very big concepts, and I would love to explore that more. It makes me think of that saying, management without leadership is like straightening the deck chairs in the Titanic, because you imply that it is because of change that leaders are made. And I think that resonates. Thank you so much. That was quite a good start. Garvey, anything different, any additions to what Angelo shared, or any opinions that might lean a little bit differently to his perspective?
Yeah, I'm totally aligned on what he said, that change will always be there. But I think there's also a transition. If we look at the situation post-COVID, there has been a transition. I mean, I've seen, for me, if I have to simplify, a change fit leader, it will be someone that would possess qualities to cultivate growth, resilience. And if I have to use an analogy, I will use the analogy of a skilled gardener. When he's planting his seed, he has to have patience. There's a lot of knowledge involved. There's dedication. So for me, change fit leadership is linked with that skilled gardener. We have to be able to bring out the best in our plants and with our employees. So I see it more from an HR perspective, and for me, it's also a lot about the skills that we need to develop, like resilience, system thinking, like Angelo mentioned. There's also clarity in our thoughts. There's also empowerment. There's also continuous learning and emotional intelligence.
Sure. Yeah, so I hear your focus very much in terms of where our people are at, in terms of that relationship to following and leading, which Angelo actually alluded to. I love that. The next question just always makes me giggle. I'm fiercely, violently interested in your failures, because I've got a friend. I actually have a group of beautiful friends around me, and we have a philosophy that you only get interesting once you failed. So I hope that we will find some interest in your conversations now. But any lessons, I hate the word failures. I think Rihanna has a tattoo on her shoulder which says never a failure, always a lesson. I love that. What happened in your career, Angela? And please don't share if it's too catastrophic. I don't want you to overshare, but anything that happened that might be helpful and might give our audience a sense of, it's okay. And this is how it works on your journey, your leadership journey.
Yeah, there are failures every day, and I think in the Spark context, and it's fairly well documented, how much we failed when we rolled out SAP into our first distribution center last year, and the learnings for the organization, and I happened to be the managing director at that facility at the time. The learnings of that particular failure were immense. I mean, the context in which that crisis made one stand up as a leader was amazing. But I think that might be a bit of a cop-out, because that's a system failure, not necessarily my own. I think if I think about my own failures, the hardest one's always when you let the people around you down, when you let your people down. And I think often, for me, there's a recent failure. I won't go into the full context of it, but the failure sometimes, or certainly for me, one of the failures was not to be as honest as I should be, and as direct as I should be with people sometimes. And there's one particular event that I'm thinking about, and I guess that in retrospect, when you let your team members down, because as a leader, a big portion of what you need to do is create an environment that gets the best out of them. And when you fail to create that environment, for me, the ones that particularly impact me is when I let that happen, because I'm either so focused on my own journey and end up being self-centered, as we all can be sometimes, or neglectful of our teams. Those are the ones that I think I learned from most, because it talks to who you are as a person, more than the business and the responsibility you have to other people, and certainly for me, wakes me up from time to time. So there is good that comes out of it.
Sure.
So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Absolutely. I think that rings so true. And I don't want to let you off the hook. I want you to sit in that vulnerability for a minute, because I think it's so powerful. If you think about, the stakeholder groups and how we tend to pitch and change our message slightly. In your case, it comes down the root, it comes down to editing a message or making a message maybe less straight as an arrow, because we think in our own judgment that we, in our choices and trade-offs, that we are being helpful or tempering the impact of certain conversations. And in that, the unintended consequences are sometimes distrust, because people always hear multiple perspectives on that. So it's so poignant what you're saying, Angela, because it happens daily. This is not out of the realm of most of the people that I coach and work with. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. It only works if you're honest, right?
I agree. And don't underestimate your people. They can, they appreciate honesty more than we think.
So I think often to find the balance between to be honest but be kind at the same time, and it's tempting at times to lean towards the kindness too much.
Yeah.
And I guess for others to lean towards the honesty too much. And I learned a long time ago that any extreme is a bad thing. Finding balance in most things is the best path.
That sounds like a helpful tool. Garvey, any hairy lessons that you've learned that you feel like we can, seeing that Angela set the benchmark so high in terms of vulnerability now, maybe
Yes.
you have something to add to
Yes, I have something quite similar. Earlier in my career, I started a new job and I had so much conviction, like to change everything, change the HR landscape. The CEO had a great vision. So I didn't assess like the maturity level. I just pushed hard for transformation. And the result was that there was complete resistance to this change. There was no teamwork, no innovation. So instead of fostering trust and taking time to build the confidence of the team, I went too fast on this project. And that failure taught me a lesson that was, there are some values that you can't replace. Like for me, it was openness and vulnerability. So since then, I've worked a lot on those, and I've worked a lot on keeping a journal, working, writing, like on myself, working on my self-awareness and working on awareness of others. And that has helped me. And from journaling, recently I wrote a book on leadership, and it's quite aligned with what Angela said. I talk a lot about authenticity, kindness, gratitude, and vulnerability. I think those are the new leadership traits that I mean, as HR, I think that's the leadership trait that I would encourage, especially when we talk about change, when we talk about the bunny world. So these would be things
Beautiful.
I'm quite passionate about.
Please share the name of your book for the audience.
Okay, yes, I've launched my book last week. The name is Redefine Vivid, Truth or Dare. It's available on Amazon, Kindle, etc.
And highly rated, I might add, seeing the reviews. So thank you for sharing, Kovi. I think, and I'm very aware of the chats in the chat box. I'm trying to see if there's a trend or a pattern, and I really invite the SBS Ed team to interrupt me if they see something that comes up a lot, because I really want to capture everybody's questions, but obviously we don't have a lot of time. So I will look for those where we have a pattern or a trend emerging. I'm interested. The moment there is a crisis or there's some kind of change happening in your environments, how does that affect your thinking, your leadership style? Maybe in some ways, even the substance that you bring in terms of leadership. So maybe, Kovi, I don't want to, do the Angelo, Kovi. Maybe if you can kick us off on this thing one.
Of course.
Your time scale of thinking in crisis or in change, specifically in change, do you find that there's a difference between thinking long-term and short-term, or internal and external, vacillating between, all the different stakeholder groups or the agendas? Because obviously as people sit around us, they have different imminent needs, so do you find that, what has worked for you? Is there anything that you might want to share with us that's helpful in terms of the time frame of your thinking in times of change?
So yes, I mean, I think in times of crisis, it may seem natural that we are more reactive, but I think it is also vital to balance our time frames of thinking. We'll have the short-term thinking, the immediate response, medium-term planning, and maybe I think we also do not need to neglect the long-term vision. I think that would be in times of crisis. If I take, for example, when we went through COVID, I mean, at that time we were just thinking how to keep the business alive and how to pay our employees at the end of the month. So that was our reactive approach, but there was something else, how to reconstruct the business. So that we had to shift. For me, in these times, what as a chief HR, I had to, sharpen my mind, take decisions that are more calculated. I was maybe less spontaneous in my decisions. And I think, yes, the trick there was, if your strategy wasn't working, there was also a plan B. We had to adapt to the situation. So yes, I think definitely in terms of crisis, it is important to also get your team aligned with your vision, with things that you want to achieve. But eventually, there was a balance between working on your own and also getting to work and weather the storm together to emerge stronger after the crisis.
I have to share this with you. You will appreciate this, but during the pandemic specifically, because crisis seemed to breed leaders or just show them up a little bit more. I was coaching a few captains and captainesses of industry, and it was so I was so aware of the fact that everybody started zooming in. It's almost like the world was out of control. So we started controlling minutiae. I'm talking about how many cups of coffee are we saving and how much toilet paper. I'm talking about what hours are my team logged on, when nothing was about strategically where are we going? So I think it's a human reaction to zoom in and to kind of like go into fight or flight. And I'm interested, Kovi, in how you kind of like move that to a longer term view. I don't know, Angelo, anything from your side in terms of your time frame and how you are managing that?
Yeah, I think there's a biomechanical sort of reaction, as you say, fight or flight. And I think if you're in a car accident, for instance, often it feels like it took hours to happen. Things just slow down, and I guess how your body reacts in that moment. And I think there's probably a link to how we deal with crisis and shortened timeframes. I certainly think for me, what's been helpful is not only considering timeframes, but also considering where leadership comes from at that time. And I think often, and I agree with everything that Kovi said, I think we went through exactly the same thing. But if I were to expand on it, I would say something that I've learned is where to position myself as a leader at different times. And yeah, I guess, Anne-Marie, you know me, so and it might not come across today, but I'm just about as shy as you can get and withdrawn, socially awkward. And my preferred leadership style is to lead from behind and sort of herd and I guess be hopefully be a pillar of strength, but not always lead from the front, right? So and everybody has their own style, but I guess being adaptive when the time needs. And I think at times in crisis, the need for me to move from the sort of herding from behind to stepping in front and act often in those times as a shield has helped the way I think about leadership. And then also knowing where to go at those times and not always the time frames become important, but in those time frames then to consider who the best people to lead are, depending on what the crisis is that you are facing, and know where to look and who to lean into at that time. I think that humility is quite important.
I like the fact that both of you are saying time frame becomes subservient to whatever is required in that time. It's almost, I'm hearing you saying, we need to be adaptable. We need to be agile about this because was it Steve Jobs who said we are relentless on vision, but very flexible on the detail? It's almost a sense of we know where we need to go, but in this moment, this is where I need to show up. I hear you say that, Angelo.
Yeah, so I think I mean Steve Jobs probably had a really great point there, in the sense that I think the more subliminal and deeply rooted your overall strategy is, and the more deeply thought out it is, and the more time you spend thinking on that long term, that my guess is, and I mean, one could, I guess, look for empirical evidence of this, but my guess would be that if your strategy is well thought out and it is embedded and you are comfortable where you're going in the long term, that your knee jerk in the short term is going to better support the long-term vision, as long as it's deeply embedded. If it's superficial and narrow, then you might end up, the chances of you ending up with jarring short-term decisions is higher.
Absolutely, I concur. I think you have framed it very nicely, and I really like the fact that there's an adaptability from both of you, because I think it's helpful to me also to hear from people who are practicing it day by day. I see in the chat box there's a lot of questions or a lot of comments on culture and EQ, so I want to raise both of them. I'm still a little bit zoomed out. I wanted to zoom in a little bit later on the personal traits. So let's start this big elephant in the room called culture. You all know the old sayings and all the research that, culture eats change for breakfast, maybe breakfast, lunch, and dinner. If we are leaders sitting in an environment where the culture says, no, We are not change fit. It doesn't matter how beautiful your plan. It doesn't matter how gracious your words. We do not want change. And we know from a systems thinking perspective that if you try and kick down the door, it will kick back harder. So we always have this little exercise in the class where I push on somebody's hand and the hand pushes back. And that's just an involuntary reaction, because with change, possibly one needs to tango rather than fight. So there's a sense of, how do you work with culture and think about culture and intentionally work with a culture, specifically a culture that says, no, don't want to change. Like what you are saying, it's kind of like nice. It's maybe good research and all of that, but not for us. We know where we come from. We know our history. Look at our results. We are doing well. Leave us alone. We don't want to change. So, Kofi, any thoughts on that? I see you on mute. I don't know who muted you.
Yeah, sorry.
It wasn't me.
Okay, when we look at, I mean, from an HR perspective, for me, when I work on culture, I put a lot of emphasis on fostering a culture of collaboration. I mean, it's very people-centric. And for me, what I've learned is that empathy is the foundation, you know, like upon which you can transform culture, especially when you're talking about collaboration. I mean, very often we think that it will also clash with being market-driven, too aggressive on the bottom line. But that's where I think leaders should be empathetic, should work a lot on themselves to balance both. I mean, both are important, the collaboration and the results. So, okay, I've seen from a personal perspective also that one must be able to recognize and acknowledge the fears and apprehension that come with change, you know. There's a lot of work that's done internally. So as a leader, we do have this responsibility to work a lot on our thoughts and feelings. So, and then, you know, like when you work on that part, on your self-awareness and awareness of others, you will see that you will be able to communicate effectively. And that's an important part when you're talking about changing the culture. The communication side is really very important. And I would say leading by example also becomes paramount, because I mean, people, when we talk about culture development, they will always look up to the leadership. So yes, I mean, I've seen a lot of change. I've worked on a lot of culture development plan. Basically, there's a lot of work around building trust. There's a lot of work about, you know, like sometimes when there's no communication, you will see that there's a specific culture. Very often it can even lead to a toxic culture if people are into group thinking, forming cliques and stuff. So that's why I've always believed that as an HR, it's quite important that we facilitate that part of collaboration. If I have to use an analogy, very often I see myself as the big brother in the family where I have to reunite. Sometimes when the parent will be fighting, I will be
You don't like your brother. Hug him.
yes,
I
to
love that.
keep everyone together.
Yeah, I love the fact that you bring up all those elements of the way we do things around here. It's not what you
Yes.
say, because we read the right books, we show up in the right courses, we all know what to say.
Yeah.
But it's doing the do, you know, it's walking the talk, and all the elements, you know, this elusive trust, and, you know, the behavioral elements of culture and how that shows up and can create trust if you are consistent with that and you are found to be, you know, you stand the test of time in that. I think those are important elements. And it sounds like you're quite intentional about understanding leadership's role in culture. Angelo, anything else from you? Any thoughts on, because you know, I know we both shared a few retail experiences, and we know I'm not going to unpack all our battle scars here, but we do know that some of these cultures are more resistant to change than others. How do you intentionally deal with that?
Head on, I guess. You know, it's. I think Kavi's really covered it really well, and in particular, I think the empathy trait is a very, very important one. I think you've got to find people where they are. And I think one must be careful of not assuming that you know everything. And that, so in communicating change and the need for change, communication is massively important. But communication implies it going both ways, right? So is not to just simply force things upon people. Listen to what they're saying, find out, and think about it. Think deeply and be prepared to acknowledge that that you might have to tack or change slightly from where you were initially intending and going. And then I think to be upfront, right? So building trust is a massively, it's rebuilding trust.
How do we do that, Angela? Because I see there's a lot on trust in the chat box also, in terms of any tips and tools for the audience in terms of this trust element.
I think, certainly in my experience, being yourself is important. So and in the prep for these engagements, I find I said something like I prefer things to be organic, and I hate anything that is set up or contrived, and I think that's quite important. So showing up as who you are, whether that be with all your weaknesses and warts, being honest about why change is necessary, but at the same time finding people where they are.
Three big tools. You're coming back to that thing of authenticity and telling the truth that you mentioned before as well.
And then, interestingly, I think depending on your position in the organization, something that I've had to make peace with as I moved into the CEO role is that everything I do and do not do sends a message, whether it's the message I intend to send or not. So to be aware of where you and what you are saying by your action or inaction on anything it's something. It requires a level of awareness and diligence that has to be there all the time, because it's not always what you say. It's sometimes who you say it to, who you talk to all the time, who you don't talk to, how you show up in any given area, when you don't show up, all of those things, and oddly enough, I mean show up physically in this particular sense. Which meetings you attend, which you don't, to people indicates so much without you having to say a single thing.
Sure.
And I guess for me, that's probably the biggest challenge of leadership, is that constant awareness about the message you are sending, both practically, actively and explicitly, and those that you're doing subliminally.
I love that. I think those are very practical and helpful tools. Thank you for sharing those. Kovi, I know, I mean, you are HR director of a big telecom in Mauritius, and I think unapologetically, I've known you for a while. We worked out the other day, it's been a few years. We both turned a slightly grey, but dare I say more beautiful by the decade. So
thank you.
I want to ask you, in this context of leading, we're not only leading internally, we're not only leading at a micro level, especially I'm talking to the C-suite people in the room, our execs, our CEOs, our first and second liners, people that are entrepreneurs that are running their own businesses. There are so many stakeholder groups. I always say when I'm facilitating, we say we are customer-centric, but we're actually shareholder-centric, because that's where the pressure is on. That's possibly the most threatening in terms of sustainability in the short term. And those two sound like contradictions, but they're not. So where, as a leader, how do you balance this focus between these massively powerful stakeholder groups, you know, the shareholder, the customer, our employees, just to name, you know, three big ones. I know your focus. I know you are definitely there for the employee, you're championing them. But obviously we are all, you know, we are businesses, we are organizations, most of us profit driven. What are your thoughts on balancing that perspective in terms of the micro and the macro environments that you need to deal and lead in and show up in, to Angelo's point?
Yes, I mean, yeah, you mentioned it. I mean, stakeholder management takes a big part. I mean, even if I'm working as a chief HR, I definitely need to understand the shareholders' need, the business needs and evolution. If I just take the example of telco, I mean, yes, we have a lot of disruptors. If I take the example of OTTs like Netflix, so it has changed. I mean, the industry, the use of internet, the use of AI. So then when we look at that, very often it requires a change in our business model. And that's also our role at C-level. I mean, whether you're wearing the hat of HR, marketing, or being the CEO, you always have to be aware of that internal and external environment. And yes, I think where it's becoming challenging is how can we get everyone on board? I mean, to face the challenges.
Yeah, and where do you start, maybe even? Because
where do
you
you
start
start?
internal, or do you start, you know, it's a
Yeah.
balancing act, I hear you say.
Yeah, it's a balancing, but definitely I think that you should also understand well your disruptors, and I think when we look at today's context, I mean, it's becoming imperative to learn continuously. If we look at the level of stress that we have now, I mean, if we just go back 10 years back, it was not like that. I mean, the emergence of AI, I mean, the future of work. I mean, we're talking about a lot of jobs becoming redundant. So I think the only way out is if you want to reduce the stress of uncertainty, is you have to continuously learn and adapt. And I think that's where I mean, as HR, I always encourage continuous development with all sort of programs, blended learning. So, but learning doesn't have to be formal. It can be anything. It can be you're
Yes,
learning
yes.
on YouTube, you're learning on. We have a wealth of information. It's just that you need to create the habit. And I think,
Learning organization. It almost sounds
yeah.
like you have this, I imagine as you're speaking, this analogy of this pendulum swinging to extremes, and
Yes.
in finding, you know, those extremes, you're actually trying to get to the balance between them. So it's like juggling. You have this ball in your hand, so you're focusing on the share, and then you're focusing internally, and then but at the end, it's about balance and finding your way as a learning organization.
True.
Any thoughts, Angelo? Anything from your side on that topic before I start concluding our conversation? There's so much I want to sit with you for 2 days, but unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah, I'd love to just have 2 days.
Yeah.
Anybody, it just life doesn't work that way. Yeah, I think, I mean, stakeholder engagement is an art or management is an art in and of itself. And I think something that I'm learning, and I certainly am still learning this, I'm not at the end of that journey at all, is that one presupposes the intentions and needs of the stakeholders. And I'm often surprised as I engage with different stakeholder groups that the market presumption and sometimes my presumption of what their needs are is often so wrong. And particularly in a world where ESG in particular is becoming more topical and something, I guess, a useful byproduct of people not always understanding ESG in the technical sense, is that things like social justice and moral justice gets conflated in that space, and it's an area that I'm actually quite hopeful for. I think things are getting better. There's a real intention from corporates and shareholder bodies to start thinking in a context broader than the bottom line. And the active legislative steps that are also driving us in that direction too. And we'll make mistakes, and I'm sure there will be many, but the overall trajectory, I think, is headed in a much more positive sense. Being a big corporate in the 80s, with a big guy with a I guess cigar behind the desk, and these big evil corporates those days, I think, are past.
It conjured an image now. Yeah, I'm with you on that one. What is, and I think it's a nice segue, and because I want to stick with you on this one, Angela. I love the fact that you bring ESGs into the conversation, because it could be a unifier, it could be a common, united purpose, that can internally and externally, where there's often such a divide. Sometimes our employees will say, I don't know which planet the people are on that are writing strategy, but it's not our planet. And this is just a perspective because of focus. But if we can find those commonalities and pull the threads, I think we are making a dent. What is currently top of mind? What is on your leadership agenda? What is keeping you awake at night? What is in your headspace?
Certainly in our organization right now, the transformation of our business, and there, I mean, the business transformation as opposed to the South African view, or the narrow view of transformation. I think something that's quite important to me is to transform and modernize our business, to go beyond just having a digital strategy, to be truly future fit. And then organizational culture and the change of our culture, I think, Anna-Marie, you've been exposed to SPAR, and I think something that we are recognizing in our organization is that often values which are meant to determine culture have dark sides to them. And I don't think when we're adopting those values, we spend enough time thinking about what the dark side of those particular values are. And how that, when taken too far, any of those values taken too far, what the consequences of those are.
They're almost weaponized in a way, no?
Yes, they can be. They definitely can be. And then I think for me, there's a war for talent, as there has been for a very long time. And I think
the bench is empty. The bench is empty, gentlemen. We need to think about this.
Yeah. And in that context, to really consider what our employee value proposition looks like, and whether it is modern and fit for purpose. And oddly, there are areas where unfortunately legislation hasn't followed as quickly in SA. I'm not sure what it's like in Mauritius, but legislation certainly hasn't followed as quickly as we needed to, so that we can modernize what the new world of work looks like.
Sure. You are giving us such a beautiful a piece of thought, or column of thought. And I want to segue to you, Kavi, because what Angela teed us up for is this conversation of what competencies are necessary in the future for our leaders to actually cope with this headspace that Angela described, because I think universally true. What are those skills and competencies we need? Are we focusing on the right thing? Are we training and facilitating and coaching in the right way? Or what's going on?
Yeah, I think if I look at today's context, the concept of leadership development has evolved. I mean, as an HR, I've developed these courses for many years, and Before, we were not putting focus on emotional intelligence, resilience, those things, and adaptability. And I think when we look at, if we take the example of the ever-changing digital landscape, like it brings, like a lot of question, like Angelo was mentioning the future of work. But I think for me, what's really important is what sets the great leaders apart is their ability to connect with others, to inspire their team, and also to foster collaboration. For me, these are the basics. If you get the basics right, the rest, because the technical side of things, you'll always be able to learn them. But the ability to inspire, the ability to communicate well and to think strategically, I think those are the most important skills.
And the most difficult, Kobe, and the most
Yes, definitely most
You're not
difficult.
helping us. Well,
Yes,
they are big.
yes, they're big. I just wanted to share a quick thought on that, because one of the thing I like what Angelo shared on value proposition. But I think when we're developing our future leaders also, there's a lot of difference in the expectation. I'll share a quick story. Recently, as the founder of a think tank on ODN leadership, I facilitated a debate between Gen Z and some CEOs. And they were surprised, like on both sides of the tables, that the expectations, the needs, they were not aligned at all. And there's a need to bridge that gap. And the only way to bridge that is with empathy and compassion. And that will pave way for tomorrow's leaders. And I think it is important to approach the expectation of each group, both collectively and holistically, because see, I mean, they are the future workforce, the Gen Z.
They are.
Very often we're still like Angelo said before, it was the cigar, but I'm not sure if we have been like work ready for the new generation.
Yeah.
You were talking about ESG. For them, there's a lot of weightage on if the company is doing, like a lot of projects in ESG, whether it's social, environmental. So yes, there's a lot of work, and I think there's also the trend that with like Upwork, people want to be freelancers, people want to be entrepreneurs. So there's a lot of thinking on that.
I hear you loud and clear, and I think very appropriate. Any last thoughts, gentlemen? I'm looking at the time and I feel like, oh my goodness, I want to keep you in this room for a while. Any last top of mind thoughts before we conclude this very valuable hour? You have been stellar. I think some of the wisdom that you've shared are so practical but so real. So, Angelo, last thoughts of encouragement maybe to our audience members.
So as the conversations are going up, I've been thinking about a podcast I listened to recently, and it really is a useful one, considering that the I guess the topic for the series of webinars around change with leadership. There's a podcast. It's on the Apple Store. I'm not sure, or Apple Podcast app. I'm not sure whether it's on whether you'll be able to find it on Android, but it's called Built for Change. And I was listening to one yesterday, a very interesting talk about the hospitality industry, actually. And the podcast started off with talking to the CEO of one of the big hotel groups. And when they asked him about leadership, what he said was he'd been the CEO of this company for a while. And that what he realized was that the fundamental thing about leadership at the moment is that 10 or 15 years ago, leadership was mechanical, and it talked to leading almost with the body. And if you think about us being roughly mind, body, and soul, he said at the moment, leading with the mind is probably the right place to be. And then, but for the future and very near future, it's going to be leading with the heart is what the world is going to need. And I think that stuck with me as a way of thinking about where we are.
You make me think of our Springbok captain when you say that. Shout out to Sia Kulisi. Here we go. Kobe, any last thoughts from you?
Yes, I think I also concur with Angelo on leading with the heart. I mean, from my observation, the shift we were always engaging with the mind, but we've shifted with engaging with both mind and heart. But eventually, I think the heart will have the higher weightage when I look at things like, like authentic leadership, being kind at work, being grateful, like being vulnerable. These are things that we were not talking. We were, like Angelo said, mechanical in many ways. But I think with this new generation, they are looking for purpose, and we can't just lead with the head. We have to really change the way we've been leading, and I think we have to lead with a purpose, but also with a big heart.
Oh my goodness, that is such a powerful place to finish. I think from my side, I cannot thank the both of you more. I think you have brought some very thought-provoking concepts into the room and opened the conversation for us. It's by no means finished. And I think for me personally, leadership and the opportunity to lead is such a wonderful way to serve and inspire others. And as we always say, Angelo, in our sessions, to create environments where people can do their best work. And maybe just to finish off from my side, sometimes we listen, I think as leaders, we listen to music and we think over the decades, the music has stayed the same. The music might sound the same, but what we know now and what we see in research and what you shared with us is that the lyrics have changed. So we need to be careful as leaders to listen carefully and to be of service and of support and help in a way that we never have been before. This vulnerability, this leading with a heart has been possibly the most powerful words coming from you. And then maybe I cannot finish off without quoting somebody who passed away. Lao Tzu, the Chinese philosopher, I think in around 500 before Christ, he said, already he said this, a leader is best when people barely recognize that they exist. And then when the work is done, the people will say, we did it ourselves. Angelo, it makes me think of your concept of leading from behind and being of support, not having to stand at the bow of the ship and saying, follow me necessarily, but just subtly being there and feeling that presence. So thank you, everybody, to our audience. You've said it, 87% of you are saying we have a leadership crisis. This is a necessary conversation, and let's not stop talking. So thanks, everybody. Thanks, Corby. Thanks, Angelo. To be continued.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thanks for inviting us, Anne-Marie.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Kerry, over to you.
Thank you, everyone. Some days I say to my boss who's in the room, Chris, some days, some hours, I get to pinch myself that I get to be a fly on the wall in sessions like this with people like you. So a big thank you to Anna-Marie, of course, for your excellent facilitation, to Kavi and Angelo, no doubt the ideas and the thoughts and that your insights, and I must say for me, the generosity in your vulnerabilities have sparked will continue beyond the webinar over the next few days and weeks as people start thinking about what was really discussed. I would also like to keep listening for the 2 days that you guys keep talking, and we can make that happen. Anna-Marie, I'm just saying we can make it happen.
We've got a
So
date.
to the three of you, really, thank you so much. Thank you to our audience for joining us for today's webinar from across the continent and beyond, for engaging so beautifully in the chat with our speakers. Please join us for the next webinar, the last installment of our Era of Accelerated Change series, taking place on the 23rd of October. You can see it on the screen. And that is focused on strategy, and that will be facilitated by another awesome human, Dr. Melvie Todd. The link to register, if you haven't already, is in the chat. And finally, with 2025 only 4 short months away, eek, speaking of acceleration, please do, if you have any people development challenges, please reach out to our team. Chanel will put our email address and website in the chat. thank you very much again. Thank you to my team, and I hope that everyone has a great rest of the week, and I'll see you in October. And then I would also like to share one experience of mine that stayed with me, and it speaks to leading with the heart. So I was fortunate enough to spend a bit of time with Mike Cathy, the CEO of Nando's South Africa, a few years ago when I was having a bit of a crisis, and he was so generous with his time, and he shared with me the Nando's mantra of it's the people that make the chicken, and that's something that has always stayed with me. It's the people, and it's the hardest thing. So yeah, I hope that everyone has a great week, and to Kavi, to Angela and Anna Marie, thank you very much.
Thanks, Kerry. Well done, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.